Why don't we go ahead? Thanks, Carolyn. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Can I get a second on that, please? Thanks, Karen. All right, this meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Emergency Ordinance 20 TAC Alpha 16, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. The committee members who are electronically present in this meeting are Tom Thorpe, Sean Bridge, myself, Mary Kate King, Roger Schickadance, David Storm, and Karen Davenport. And did anybody else join? The persons responsible for receiving public comment are the 5th and Avon Community Advisory Committee, and the opportunities to the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County calendar. County staff present at this meeting are Carolyn Schaefer, Andy Redelbach, and Tori Kenopoulos. Has everybody had the opportunity to, oh, Diane, good to see you. Diane Greider also present. Roger, please capture that in the minutes. Thanks. And Andrew, good to see you too. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes, and are there any corrections noted?
No.
With
Motion
that,
to approve.
Second.
yeah, let's make it unanimous. Great. Minutes approved. Well, thank you. The next item on the agenda was unfortunately redirected because Liz told me that she wasn't going to be present tonight. But David brought up, hey, it's Liz's last meeting. It would be a great opportunity to recognize her.
Hey, James.
Thanks to, pardon me?
Okay, there's a little bit of background noise. Somebody maybe who's not muted. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Is that sound okay now? Is everybody muted?
Mm-hmm.
David brought up, hey, it's Liz's last meeting. Let's recognize her. Unfortunately, she let me know just a few minutes ago she wasn't able to join us tonight. But I just wanted to highlight a few of her accomplishments since she's been on the board, namely the renovation expansion of the Ivy Municipal Utility Center, expanded hours at McIntyre Recycling, InDesign at Southern Convenience Center, and establishment of the Yancey Community Center. And on a very personal level, I'll say that Liz's first year on the board also aligned with my internship with Albemarle County government when I was a UVA student. And Liz was just a fantastic mentor and somebody who helped me out and showed me the value of local government. So she's not here, but thank you to all of you for your generous donations. And we've got something for her in her mailbox, and it's there. And Tori, if you could just express to Liz when you see her next, how much we appreciate her service to the community. With that, we'll turn it over to Andy Redelbach for the ZMA announcement.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Redelbach, and I'm a senior planner here with the Albemarle County Planning Division. And tonight on the agenda, we have a community meeting for a rezoning application that was recently submitted to the county for review. So I am just going to give a brief presentation, an overview of the process, why we're here tonight, and brief overview of the application, and then I'll turn it over to the applicants who are also here tonight, and they will give a more detailed presentation of what it is that they've applied for. So the application number is ZMA 2021-14, and it is called Albemarle Business Campus Amendment. So the purpose of a community meeting is to share information about proposed projects in the development review process, including policies and regulations that staff looks at during the review, such as the county zoning ordinance and the county's comprehensive plan. We also solicit public input at this proposed project, and a summary is included in the staff report reviewed by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And then there are 2 additional meetings where public input is welcomed as well. And those are 1 each with the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And neither of those meetings has been scheduled at this time. So a rezoning is a type of legislative review, which means that approval by the Board of Supervisors is required. And the specific type of legislative review that this application is for is a zoning map amendment to change the zoning district of a property. Before the Board of Supervisors hears an application for rezoning, however, that the project proposal, the application is reviewed by both county staff, including staff from divisions like planning, engineering, zoning, the architectural review board, if applicable, building inspections. And then there are several outside agencies as well, like VDOT and the Service Authority, that also review it. After staff's review, it goes to the Planning Commission, and the planning commissioners consider the project and they make a recommendation of either approval or denial to the Board of Supervisors. And then ultimately the board makes the final decision whether to approve or deny the application. So there are two main ways that zoning is determined: either use of buildings such as residential, commercial, or institutional, and the size and shape of buildings such as height, setbacks from the street, square footage, that sort of thing, or the form and massing of the building. And the application that we're hearing about tonight actually does incorporate both of these types of zoning in their request. And I'm sure the applicant will provide more information on that. So as I mentioned, a zoning map amendment is an application to change a property's zoning. And during staff's review, the application is reviewed for consistency with the future land use designation as identified in the county's comprehensive plan and relevant master plans, state and local authority codes, regulations, standards, and then architectural review board guidelines, if applicable, if the property is in an entrance corridor. So as I mentioned, the application before us tonight is Albemarle Business Campus. And so this application, I've shown you a aerial view of the site. It consists of a couple parcels down at the intersection of 5th Street and Old Lynchburg Road, right south of the 64 interchange. And it's right across 5th Street from the county office building on 5th Street. And it's in the Scottsville Magisterial District. It consists of about 8.5 acres. And currently allows mix of commercial uses. And this application is a little different from some in that the base zoning district is not being proposed to change, but they are requesting to amend their code of development and the application plan that was approved with a previous rezoning. So to provide a little more information on that is both parcels are zoned currently NMD, which stands for Neighborhood Model District, and allows a mix of residential and commercial uses. And this zoning district was approved by the Board of Supervisors last year in October of 2020 in accordance with the application ZMA 2019-3. And as a part of that application, because the Neighborhood Model District is a planned district, it requires a code of development and an application plan showing the conceptual layout of the site to be approved along with the rezoning. And so those two items the applicant is requesting to amend with this application. They are planning to keep the NMD zoning district the same. However, they are looking to amend both the code of development and the application plan. And I failed to mention, a code of development really outlines what the standards of that development are. So they have the building height, the uses, setback from the street, the massing of the buildings, the conceptual layout of the site. That's all identified in the development. Some other important site factors to consider on this property is that it is in an entrance corridor, which is 5th Street, so it will be reviewed by the Architectural Review Board as well. It's also in the Airport Impact Area Overlay District, and there are several areas of managed steep slopes on the property as well. So this property is located within the Southern and Western Urban Neighborhoods Master Plan, which is a subplan of the county's overall comprehensive plan. And in this master plan, it is designated for community mixed use, and recommended uses for the community mixed use designation include residential up to 34 units per acre, and then a mix of commercial and institutional uses such as community scale retail, service, and office, and then places of worship, schools, and then institutional uses. So in the map on the right, the brown is community mixed use. The orange on either side is urban density residential, which really recommends higher density residential, more like the between 6 to 34 units per acre. And then the blue across the street is designated for institutional uses, and that's where the county office building is located. So that's just a brief overview of the what the applicant is requesting and the background context of the site. And so now I'll turn it over to the applicant to provide a more detailed presentation. However, first I did want to just provide a timeline of the project. So as I mentioned, this was submitted a couple weeks ago. So the staff review of the proposal is currently ongoing. We are having the community meeting here with the CAC this evening. And then, as I mentioned, there are 2 future meetings, one with the Planning Commission and one with the Board of Supervisors. However, neither of those meetings has been scheduled at this time. If you would like to be notified of when those meetings with the Planning Commission and the board are scheduled, however, and just general updates on the project, my email address is at the bottom of the screen. So you're welcome to email me and request that your name be added to a contact list, and I'd be happy to send out updates as the process goes along, including when those meetings ultimately are scheduled for. So that's all I have for this evening. And now I'll turn it over to Kelsey Schlein, who is representing the applicant tonight. Thank you.
Hey, Andy, thank you very much. Kyle will actually be giving the presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions that come up. So Kyle, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll just share my screen here. Sorry, a little problem with screen share. One sec.
While you're doing that, Kyle, I'm gonna bridge the gap and ask Andy a question. When it says the airport impact area overlay, can you just briefly tell us what that means?
So the airport impact overlay is a district based on where the kind of flight paths coming out or going into the airport are. And there are a few additional regulations that we have to look at if a property is in that. But they're mainly having to do with height requirements, that sort of thing, to make sure that there aren't like tall transmission towers or that sort of thing located within the path of the of any airplanes that may be coming in or out of the airport. And I'd certainly be happy to send the code section along to everyone as well, so you can read exactly what it is that we have for properties in the airport impact area.
Yeah, I just was curious because I see it all the time, you know, on applications as being in that area, and I didn't really know what the definition of it was. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And so, sorry about the technical difficulties here. Can everyone see this slide on my screen? Okay, great. So I'm Kyle Rittinger. I'm the developer behind this project. And I wanted to begin by introducing my other team members, Kelsey Schlein, I think many of you know, who works for Shimp Engineering, which is does all our civil work and manages the rezoning process for us, as well as David Manka, who has been consulting with me on this project. David is a Charlottesville area resident and does a lot of work with Big Pharma on FDA drug approvals. Real quick update on our project status that might be on some people's minds. You know, we've been under construction, I think, since about March of this year. We had some delays due to county permitting issues. So we were off-site basically all summer. we started construction again. And then in the end of October, we got hit with a double rainstorm that flooded the hole in the ground that we had. So we lost another month, but we're back up and running. So I think the site should be, those big dirt piles you see as you drive by and things should be going down, and hopefully late spring, we'll put the road in and things will be looking a lot more presentable, hopefully towards the end of the spring. So we wanted to do a quick presentation to overview the concept for this rezoning, really to answer questions about what we'd like it to look like, our ideal tenants, and then to answer any questions from the community. So I'll make this pretty quick for everyone. When we started our rezoning about 2.5 years ago or so, we were thinking a lot more about what the office environment was like pre-COVID. And with COVID, a lot of us probably are become very familiar and used to working from home, myself included. And I think there was a fear from our project that, we wondered if we'd ever see a similar return to an office environment. So I started trying to think about other options to build on this site. And after a bunch of homework, it became apparent that there's a big need in the biotech manufacturing sector for space. Particularly in major markets like Boston and Raleigh. This is a very exciting and quickly growing real estate segment. And it's one of the few things I think with sort of current COVID environment that we know there'll be a lot of demand for in the near future. So we hired Bruce Wardell, who's a local architect, and he did our design for our original office building that was approved as part of our code of development design. And I told Bruce, I said, look, let's make something that's very iconic, very attractive, because we want to go after, a larger company, something that's well-funded, that wants to make Albemarle County its home. And the exciting thing about, this industry, and I think from Albemarle's perspective, is like we have a lot of healthcare workers in the region. So we've got obviously UVA health system, which is a huge employer, but we've also got another 60 or 70 or so earlier stage biotech companies. UVA does hundreds of millions of dollars of research through the hospital with things that are related to biotech. And then externally, there's been just a massive amount of growth in biotech in general. So all these sort of signs to me point to Albemarle being a great, potential location for someone to be located here to do this. And so what I mean when I say biotech manufacturing, and I think maybe the best way to think about this is from, maybe a PhD candidate who joins UVA, in his mid-20s. He's part of a research group that's maybe researching some sort of cancer cure, and they discover a marker or something that looks interesting in the science, and they raise a bunch of money at UVA. And all of a sudden, it looks like there might be an opportunity to develop this drug. And so they're doing a lot of tests and experiments and studies and things at UVA. But the key thing is when that drug goes to a clinical trial phase, and if people have more questions about this, I'll let David explain it because he's certainly the expert. But if the drug goes to clinical trial, they need a specific type of space in order to make that drug. Okay. And these drugs that we're referring to are not like ibuprofen and chemical drugs. They're drugs like mRNA that we all know with Moderna's vaccine, and they have to be grown in these sort of very specific types of facilities that are approved by the FDA. And so these facilities are specifically designed around the process of that drug. So they're very high tech, they look like basically clean rooms with a, big sort of bioreactor, sort of like a brewery almost, and a whole sort of production line of quality control and a bunch of scientists and things like that. So if you Google, Moderna vaccine facility, if you want to see what the interior looks like, there's a bunch of videos on the internet you can see. The other exciting thing about a building like this is it provides, I think, a lot of opportunities for us to be part of a cool industry and benefit the community. So as I mentioned earlier, we think there's going to be substantial demand for biotech manufacturing space, whereas traditional office is definitely going to be challenging. Secondly, I think there's a strong fit with our existing community. You know, there's a lot of folks who are associated with the EV hospital system and healthcare in general. The labor force, I think, is a very strong fit for the types of employees that you would need in this type of facility. This industry is a target of both Albemarle County and economic development on both state, local, and regional levels. It provides jobs of all levels. So, I mean, you do have PhDs and doctors and folks like that that are working in these facilities, but you also have a lot of, you know, jobs that maybe don't pay as much, but require a lower skill barrier to entry. So there's a lot of job opportunities for people in our community, and those jobs pay pretty well because they are relatively highly specialized. The facility, as I mentioned, is very difficult to build, so it's very expensive. And what that means is we have a lot more tax dollars per square foot that go back to pay. You know, I think schools have been a concern of this CAC before. So I'd hope that a building like this, if we were able to build it, would provide more benefit to the community in terms of tax dollars. And finally, I think, you know, unlike, you know, I think, you know, we were thinking about this site, maybe a, you know, a hotel or a smaller office building. One of the really exciting things about this is if you know, we go out and we market to these types of tenants and we land one, there's, I think, a big opportunity to make something that's very beautiful. And that's unique to, I think, the design of this project, that we're really trying to attract someone who wants this type of architecture and wants a very progressive building. And so we'd hope we'd land someone like that. You know, these facilities have sort of a specific type of program that they run. So they're between 50 and 150,000 square foot. We're about in the middle of that. You know, development costs are 500 to 2,000 per square foot. Within these facilities, you can really think of it as sort of three separate buildings or uses. The first is your GMP, which is your sort of your lab and production space. That's your, you know, climate controlled, hermetically sealed glass room with lab coats and things like that. You've got about a third of that building dedicated to your sort of compliance and quality control and all your other office requirements. And then a third of that is sort of your warehouse, you know, is probably cold storage of some sorts, space where you store your samples or your finished product. These facilities, like I said, are located near R&D Talent Center. So on the East Coast, Boston is the $1 market by far. Raleigh's been growing immensely, but there is a big push from Virginia State to draw people here. There have been, I think, a couple $1 million in grants that have happened for the Richmond area already for this type of facility. So it is very exciting, sort of hot real estate market right now. It is, the interior of that building is an FDA regulated process. So what that means is there's a lot of science and expertise around designing a facility that's, you know, safe and functional and produces drugs that are, you know, have all the quality controls and standards that we would expect out of a drug produced in the United States. We're thinking of a building that would probably be a single tenant building. And the leases that these folks sign are typically much longer term than your typical office lease. And that's because it takes 10 to 15 years to get a drug approved by the FDA. So they want to make sure they're in that same approved facility for the timeline of their approvals. And we're thinking about a building that would be probably between 50 and 200 person staff. Our site plan changes, I think, you know, we tried to minimize sort of any changes toward the site plan that we had approved. So you'll see the building footprint from our original, you know, sort of hotel or office flex building has grown slightly. And we didn't want to lose the park space that we had in the middle. So we slid that park space basically over to here to create a bigger central park for our tenants. So that's one layout if we maximize sort of the footprint that we're asking for in the rezoning. Certainly there's other variances from that, but, you know, I think the key is we're not losing any of this park space or green space. The building footprint itself has some key features that I would hope are, you know, desirable for a tenant, but also maybe relevant to the community discussion. And so one is, you know, there needs to be some sort of loading area. So when you produce that drug in Albemarle County, and then you're going to have, you know, trial participants all over the country, or maybe they're in New York City or something. So you need to have access for, you know, box trucks to load and ship those drugs. You need an outdoor sort of utility location, you know, whether that's for a generator backup or CO2 storage or something like that, that you might need to operate your facility, that there has to be space for that. We need a larger contiguous floor plan potentially for that tenant. The actual space that the drug is produced in is actually pretty small. It can be done in, you know, 10 or 15,000 square feet typically, but we didn't want to go out and market to folks with a size that, you know, maybe what didn't give as much optionality for folks. And then if we were to offer a facility like this, we would need to park it for all the employees. So we rendered a parking deck that was attached to the rear of that building. So it'd be screened from the street, but would still be functional. The last sort of key feature, we're asking for a height change in the building. And this section of the site actually sits lower because it's on the backside and it slopes down from Old Lynchburg. It sits a little bit lower than the office building that we had approved here in the middle. So the actual scale of this rendering, you'll see it doesn't really become more prominent or more obstructive to views or the appearance of the site than the original building that was approved. So, you know, our hope is that that scale building isn't really a big problem because it's set back so far from the road. And then here's a street level view of this scale, again, showing what that might look like from a horizontal view. Here's a rendering from inside the community, just to give you a sense of, you know, scale of this building versus the office building across the street. Again, I think to clarify, we're not, you know, we don't need to build a building this big if a tenant doesn't want it. We just didn't want to go and market to these pharmaceutical companies with a size that was maybe too small for their needs. It's a night view. So thank you. That's all I had from a presentation standpoint, but happy to take questions or direct questions to Kelsey or David if I can't answer them.
Hey, Kyle, thank you so much for that presentation. That was informative. Love the visuals. I'm wondering what your rationale is in sort of being so hyper-specific in predetermining the type of clientele that you want to have. Was that something that was driven by community needs or market outputs? And then Tom, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, after Kyle answers, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this space.
Sure. And I mean, I think to me, I wanted to, you know, doing a standard office building is exciting, but I wanted to do something that made a bigger mark on the community. And this site gave us the opportunity to do that. So it was like, well, what are we going to do? Just a giant normal office building, or can we target something that, basically it was, you know, what's the best fit for Charlottesville based on my experience and who we know here, and what markets or what industries are growing that need space. And to be fair, it's, you know, getting this type of tenants is going to be a difficult draw. It's not like, you know, when Moderna is looking to build a new facility that Charlottesville or Albemarle is top of the list. You know, in fact, we're not even on the list. You know, you call up these firms and they go, oh yeah, I know Charlotte. Yeah, that's nice. It's right near Raleigh, isn't it? You're like, no, it's not the same thing. So it was really just, you know, that's where the industry is moving. It's a really exciting product to build. I think it can be a really strong fit for our culture and demographics. And it's exciting. And I like challenges, quite frankly. And it's very possible that, you know, it never happens. That's certainly a possibility. But, you know, when you talk to pharma, and they say, when they talk about site selection and things like this, you always hear the same sort of concerns from them. It's, you know, site readiness. How soon is that site going to be ready for me to occupy? And by us sort of proactively getting this building approved and ready to go, we solve that problem for them. And then the second thing is workforce. You know, they don't want to obviously have 150 employees. You know, if they can't source 150 employees in Albemarle County, they would never come here. So we're also working on some workforce solutions with state and regional folks to fund programs that would train folks to the skill set that people need. So it's sort of a long answer. It's it's a reach. It's very difficult to do, but it's a very exciting space right now. And I think we can do it as a community and on this site.
Tom, you're on mute if you want to jump in.
There we go. Kyle had stopped by. Hi, Kyle. A few weeks ago, maybe months now, visited, take a tour after Scientific. Contract manufacturing, to contrast with what we do, we don't own the products. So we're a platform where customers would come to us and we would essentially bottle them in your terms. In what Kyle's representing is a case where somebody has their product and they want to make it and control it. That's sort of a distinction. If you looked at the pharmaceutical manufacturing process, there's the front end where you make the drug, pure drug itself, whether it's fermentation or chemical synthesis, it's highly concentrated. And then there's the bottler who dilutes it, puts in the bottles. We're the bottler part of it. Kyle's kind of describing something that's both the front end and the back end, and that's not unusual for biotech type products, antibiotics and things like that. The challenge is landing that right customer. The cycle times on an FDA could be 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I knew a company called Therian that had $80 million invested in 200 employees, and it was a drug for pancreatic cancer, and it didn't get past phase 2, and they immediately closed shop. 200 people were laid off, and the 80 million was gone. That's the high risk in this business that he has. If you nail somebody, you're going to be the right person at the right spot for them. It's just, I think you need to have a backup plan. These are business decisions. Kyle's quite capable. He doesn't need to talk to me or, to get it, but those are the risks of it. So Kyle's coming to us to ask to introduce what he wants changes for and what he wants to introduce to our area. I think it's a terrific idea. It's a terrific objective. It's just a risky objective. That's all. And that's a business decision on his part. If I can elicit anything else, probably a little more room for 18 wheelers to swing in. I immediately saw that. I can give you an example that would match Kyle's interests. We were approached 2 weeks ago by a company that wants to spend $100 million and wanted to know if we can make a particular type of drug. We did not have the facilities, and they wanted to know if we had a building nearby and they would invest in it, and they wanted us to manage it. We didn't have a building nearby. And so they're stuck because they got a bunch of customers. So in that situation, Kyle would have a great landing. It's just, it doesn't come by very often. But when they do come by, they're very desperate, and they usually have a ton of money to do it. And they would prefer to do it themselves. 15 years lease seems short when you have a drug product with that much investment. I don't want to keep going. I can go on and on, but maybe that's enough background to help you guys out.
No, that was awesome context. It was totally what I'm missing. Kyle, do you want to respond to any of that before I turn it over to the rest of the field for questions?
No, thank you, Tom. Very, very insightful. I think it's very helpful.
Great. The first hand I saw was Rogers.
Unmuted here. Hi, thanks, Kyle. I just had some questions about the overall capacity of the site, because it looks like you're asking for a 25% increase in the square footage on this one parcel. And along with that come more cars. And in the past, there have been a lot of concerns about traffic at the intersection, and even with the roundabout, that's not going to reduce the number of cars. So I guess that's one part of the question. Do you really need to increase the square footage on this one parcel, or could you divide up that use over a couple parcels? And or even combine parcels maybe into one building so that you wouldn't have to go after increased density. And then a different question I'll go ahead and ask now is I noticed that the light industrial use increase from, I can't remember if I saw 20,000 or 25,000 originally to now what's proposed is 125,000. So that's a pretty significant increase in light industrial. And I think you're probably going to say it's more of an office building like atmosphere, but yet you do have the loading and unloading, and there's disruption from that that will affect the neighborhood. So those are my questions. Thanks.
Sure, I'll let Kelsey chime in on the traffic impact question, but on the thing and the zoning question too. My understanding of the light industrial zoning is that's the zoning ordinance that captures biotech manufacturing, and there isn't really a good sort of designation for this type of product in the code. So it's the next best thing, I guess. And I think, like I said, it's, you know, the building really is sort of three separate things. You know, it's the logistics, it's the production, and it's the office side. And to emphasize that, you know, we're not talking about, when you say light industrial, I think people think smokestacks and off gas. And, you know, these facilities are very, very clean. You know, they're FDA regulated, and, if you drive by Tom's facility, you know, there's not smokestacks coming out of his roof, at least that I've seen, and there shouldn't be. And on the contiguous floor plan issue, I think, you know, we considered expanding the size of that main office building in the front. I mean, that's certainly possible, and I think allowable under our code as proposed. But I think with the loading and the utilities that I mentioned, that really should happen in the back to be more attractive for the community. That was sort of the key reason for setting that building against the back. Kelsey, do you want to take the traffic impact question?
Yeah, certainly. I'll start off quickly just with the footprint increase, though. I think that might be a easier one to tackle. So the original rezoning that was approved, there was a limitation on the building footprint size for office, flex, and R&D users. And reading the description for R&D, research and development users in the Southern and Western Neighborhoods Master Plan, this kind of really aligns with that type of user. And so there was a building footprint limitation of 20,000 square feet, but there was an overall allowable square footage of 100,000 square feet. So with a 4-story building height that's permitted, that would limit a R&D flex user to 80,000 square feet. But another user, an office building, a hotel, they were permitted to have larger building footprints. And so then they could capture that, 100,000 square feet, which is allowable in the existing zoning. So, and then we're requesting an additional 25,000 square feet of non-residential square footage in block 2. And how that translates into traffic. So we completed a comprehensive TIA with the previous rezoning for an increase of 25,000 square feet in non-residential. We're looking at it really depends on who that final user is, but let's say 270 trips. In our application that we presented, we estimated, we tried to be conservative with our estimates and evaluated the impact from an office user, which typically has a relatively high traffic impact. And the additional increase in 25,000 square feet, it kind of falls in line with what we previously evaluated, largely because some of the uses that we evaluated in the original TIA aren't going to take shape on ABC. So for example, the original TIA evaluated the impact of 150 residential units. By the time we took the application to the Board of Supervisors, that was limited to 128 residential units. The traffic study also evaluated the impact of 102,000 square feet of office space. And we've gotten, although no site plan has been submitted, BRW Architects has put in a lot of time and effort into coming up with a design for a potential office building. And instead of 102,000 square feet, that's likely going to be 69,000 square feet. So the original study done 2 years ago was pretty conservative and evaluated the maximum potential build out on this. And so largely the 25,000 additional square feet are encompassed in that evaluation.
Raj, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so for now. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So the order I'm tracking, I think I've got MK, Sean, Andrew, and then Rick. Does that sound right? Cool. All right. I see a thumbs up. So MK, floor is yours.
Thank you. I guess one of my questions is I guess at this point, you don't have your eyes on any one specific customer. Like Tom was saying, it would have to be someone who was just coming along at the right time, but you're not eyeing any one specific company at this point. Is that true?
Yes and no. I mean, we've been in discussions with we're in discussion right now with a recently, IPO'd biofarm with some connections to Charlottesville. And these are relate like any, sort of commercial broker relationship. You have to have a relationship with the tenant. They have to know about Charlottesville. So we've been doing a lot of work preliminarily saying, hey, Albemarle County is a great spot to do business. We've got this site. Are you interested? What concerns do you have? So a lot of those things that I shared in that presentation were information that I got from, big brokers in Boston who lease these spaces all the time. So we're trying to get on the list, basically. So we're not just sitting here and someone stumbles into us. Our plan is, if this is approved by the community, then we're going to proactively market the site to tenants. And that means the site is shovel ready, the workforce is ready to go or trainable. Here are the potential economic incentives that the municipality, the state will provide. And here's the team that's going to help you execute that. So that this is a big piece, because it takes so long with the county, but there's, 4 or 5 other key pieces that we will package together and proactively market to a future tenant.
Okay. And then Tom was saying, there's risk involved, obviously, because you could lose a tenant or you could have somebody on the hook and something could fall through. And what about, I guess my question would be, if that happens, or let's say they're in there 10 to 15 years, and 15 years from now, there's less of a need for this type of product. Who do you see as the next type of industry that would want this building or this type of building if it's not biotech?
I think the building can still, really what we've done is we built an office building with some utilities and logistics area in the back and with really high ceiling heights. So it's an expensive building to build because you add all these features and extra space for all the, plumbing and, HVAC and all the filters and things like that. But certainly that could be repurposed into a traditional office tenant. It's not like a single use building, like, storage, self-storage, for instance, is really just always going to be self-storage, or apartments are always going to be just apartments or condos. This has a flexibility, you could convert the bottom floor to retail space. The top floors could be office. It has a lot more sort of reuse opportunities. And I do agree with Tom that, you certainly risk FDA, blowing up your trials and now you're in big trouble. But I think and Dave and I have talked a lot about this. There's a lot of money in new technology related to mRNA and all these other biologics, therapeutics that we think, at least for the next 10 years, are going to be incredibly, in high demand for space. So if we heaven forbid, we build a big expensive facility and our tenant goes belly up because they didn't do the trial, we hear from people all the time, like, do you have a facility that's ready to go? We want to move in right away. I think that would actually be a big benefit to us, and we'd probably be in a good position to scoop someone in and take over that facility. And now that's easy, much easier said than done. And I wouldn't want to be in that position. But I'm not too worried about that personally.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is probably for Rick or Tori or Andy, but related to the comment about the light industrial, and just that if we approve, or if the county approves more square footage for that particular use, even though the intention now is that it wouldn't be industrial, does that open the door for something different if this falls through, where we've approved some type of use that maybe wasn't the exact intention, but then we've allowed something that we didn't really mean to allow? Is that possible?
So I can take that, certainly. It would depend on what the use is listed as in the Code of Development. And then they're going back to the county zoning ordinance and how such a use is listed and identified, defined in the zoning ordinance. And the county zoning division would look at that and determine whether any given use would fall within a light industrial use, or however it's listed in the Code of Development. So that is something that staff reviews during the application review process, is how the use is listed and what other potential uses would fall under that specific term that's used in the Code of Development.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle, hearing that response, like, pardon my really bad analogy, but I think of like cities that are desperate for an NBA team, and they build basketball stadiums, and they're like, we're just going to build it and we hope they come. Tell me where that analogy breaks apart.
In development, that's called building a spec or speculative building. And first of all, we're not getting millions of dollars from the municipality to build this, which I think is usually the case in stadiums. And secondly, we wouldn't build a building without a tenant and a signed lease. I mean, it's far too expensive. And like I said, we're not Boston, which is, the hot spot for this stuff right now. So it would be financially silly to do that.
Got it. Sean, I think you're up next.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Kyle and team. And Andy, I wanted to ask a question, kind of a follow-up to what MK just asked. So with regards to the light industrial and the county deciding, if it wasn't a biomanufacturer, what would be allowed in that? Does that mean that the approval would be limited to biomanufacturing? Or does that mean that anything that's considered light industrial, if these changes are approved, would be able to fall into this space?
So it would be based on how that term is defined in the Code of Development. And if it's not specifically defined in the Code of Development, then it goes back to the zoning ordinance and how that term is defined in Chapter 3 of the zoning ordinance, where there's the list of the county's official definitions of certain terms. And so that is what the zoning division would look at in determining whether any given use that the applicant is interested in putting in there would fall under light industrial or light manufacturing or that sort of thing.
Thanks. And so there's some terminology I don't understand. So is there a specific definition of light industrial for this project, or is there a definition of light industrial for this zoning or this code of conduct?
I would have to, let me pull up the zoning ordinance real quick to see exactly how it's listed in there.
And while you look for that, I'll ask Kyle a question. Kyle, because you're a smart business person, I'm sure you've looked at what other light industrial industries would be looking for a space like this, when you suddenly say, okay, we can go up to 75 feet, we have this much space, we have a loading dock, we have room for 18 wheelers. What are the other industries that fall under light industrial that would be also interested in bidding for a site like this?
We really built this whole site around the biotech concept. And I think Kelsey maybe can talk a little bit more about code of development. So we've already eliminated a lot of uses, I think, that are under the light industrial code that were considered undesirable for the neighborhood. So I'm not quite sure what we're allowed to do in there that would be, I guess, undesirable from the community standpoint.
How did you eliminate ones that were undesirable? Through design or?
No, through our existing development code that has eliminated those uses already. Kelsey, can you? Sorry,
I'll chime in. So currently, at this point, we, in our initial pre-application meeting with the county, but prior to making an initial submittal, we kind of talked about this biotech user, and we have it currently listed as we have an office/flex/research and development user. That's a term that's listed in the master plan. And so perhaps, and we'll be working through this with Andy with our resubmittal, that there perhaps needs to be a more concrete definition for what exactly that user is in our code of development, and we can handle that through a resubmittal. The light industrial uses is currently is a special use permit use in our code of development. We're of the understanding right now that there's a distinction between the research and development and the light industrial uses. So currently, research and development is something that's permitted. Light industrial uses are permitted. They're not permitted in any block except for in block 2 by special use permit. So any something that's considered a light industrial use that really doesn't fit in with that research and development category would have to come back before the Board of Supervisors for a special use permit. But that's the definitions of those things is something that we'll keep working through with county staff with the resubmittal.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Kelsey and Kyle.
And Sean, I think I just thought of the like Amazon warehouse maybe would be something that would fit in that size building, but I don't think it would work on this site with the logistics and traffic flow and things like that. So that would be an obvious use. I think if we were, somewhere else with more access along the back, but wouldn't fit here.
So far you're focused on biomanufacturing, which you said is getting a tenant like this isn't going to be easy, correct?
Yes.
Great. I'll try to be quick with the rest of my questions. So I see there's an application includes changing or removing some of the setbacks. Is that along the 5th Street side or the Old Lynchburg side or the Wahoo Way side or all three?
That is specifically for just this block 2, which is in the rear of the site adjacent to the internal road. So that's the only setback adjustment that we're requesting.
So it's the setback to the internal road, not the setback to Wahoo Way? Okay.
Correct.
And is the increase in height only for this block, or does it apply to, or could it apply to the front-facing buildings on 5th Street and Old Lynchburg?
Correct. The increase in height is exclusive to this block.
Okay. And would the road access for the box trucks be coming in on Wahoo Way or Old Lynchburg Road?
It's the the primary access for the box for a box truck is coming off the private street, and so they could enter, I guess, depending on which way they're traveling on 5th Street, they could enter from Old Lynchburg or from Wahoo Way.
Okay. And is there a rendering? And one of the pictures might have had this. Is there a rendering from the Wahoo Way side? So all those apartment residences, what that would look like, the parking deck, the building. And while Kelsey looks for that, I will ask my next question.
Next meeting last or next meeting?
Next meeting last. It has 3 parts. It has 3 parts though. And these are quick though. Kyle's going to know these. Ballpark, what's the overall cost of the project between both the residential side and this side?
The total development budget?
Yes.
I mean, there's a fair amount of variety in what ends up getting built in the office and retail blocks. I mean, we're north of 40 million for phase one, and then it depends on what size we're talking about for phase two.
So all in 50 million or 150 million?
Probably north of 100 to 150 total.
And what was the total amount of cash proffers as part of the project?
We proffered 500,000.
And then are there additional improvements to roads, sidewalks, public transportation as part of your proffers in addition to the 500?
Yeah, we have a whole host of proffers that, I don't have in front of me now, but we have, road along the front, we've got access and sidewalks and everything. We've got, public spaces, we've got tree screens. And I think we're pretty comprehensive about, our total package, I believe, is worth over $1 million. And then there's, tens of millions of more dollars the community gets from direct and indirect tax benefits associated with the commercial portions of the development.
Okay. And then I'll just, for committee's sake, especially folks that weren't around for this previously, I'd remind everyone that the way the master plan is written is the development of the site and redevelopment, rezoning has to live to a higher standard than regular rezoning. And I feel like we've slid significantly away from what was originally the intention here. And I understand there had to be a pivot because of COVID and office space, but I think we're sliding dangerously close to something we don't want on this site, given the location and given the county's guidance for redevelopment of this spot. That is it. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you, Sean. I've got Andrew, Rick, Tom, and David. We're going to cut it off after that unless they get questions in the next 2 minutes. So if you want to raise your hand, raise it now. But with that, over to Andrew for next feedback.
Thanks, James. Kyle, kudos to you and your team for making a pivot like you have. And we're obviously, I think all of us familiar with, in every environment right now, folks are doing the same thing. So appreciate your research and into that. And it's obviously timely where we are in terms of the pandemic. It makes sense to me anyway. From a community health and safety perspective for biotech, what do you envision in terms of community outreach? Is it that much different in a neighborhood or a set of neighborhoods that have not lived next to a biotech space? I mean, if this goes into Medford, just north of Boston, it's just another one, right? So is there anything that you guys have considered in terms of the outreach that would be necessary should this go forward?
Certainly, I think if there were this type of tenant, there would be a pretty big public relations component to it because there's a lot of employees and things. So I'd imagine we'd do something like that. David, have you experienced community outreach needs in other areas?
I can say we have these sort of facilities, similar facilities in and around the city already, right? So what we're talking about is not, in some ways, it's very similar to the research that's happening at UVA. Hemoshare is right in my neighborhood, a few blocks away, and there's houses that back right up to it. So it's, I think that when Hemoshare opened, we did some community engagement, invited people in, showed them around, talked about what we were doing. Senator Warner came for a visit at one point. So, you just kind of open your doors and answer questions, because anytime you talk about cutting edge medical technologies, you're going to elicit a response, and you just have to engage and be open and be welcoming. I think that's the approach here, because at the end, these are the therapies of tomorrow. The demand, the pipeline is extraordinary. The amount of money pouring into these new technologies, and there is a bottleneck in terms of being able to produce them because the facilities are highly specialized. And that's why we're doing this. It's a really exciting, from my perspective, I'm a scientist. involved in drug development. And for me, it's extremely exciting to have this kind of facility in our community, and that will require some, some outreach, some education, no doubt.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one of the lessons we've learned too is this is also a national security issue in terms of having these capabilities inshore as opposed to offshore, whether that's an initial development or production or whatever. But my last question, thank you for David for that too. My last question is about infrastructure. Kyle, you mentioned the requirements on the inside of the building itself in terms of the specialized systems, which are extensive, no doubt. Does that translate into any specific additional infrastructure needs on the county's side of that type of facility, whether it's power, water, wastewater, other waste?
On the power side, I think we're covered there. We've got a pretty big connection that we're working on because we originally planned for a couple office buildings or hotels in there. On the utilities, on the ACSA side, I've reached out to ACSA preliminarily and just given the heads up that we're thinking about this. I guess they have a sort of whole approval review process associated with these sorts of facilities that they'll manage it, if things get approved and if we have a known tenant with a known process. But I didn't get the sense from I talked to 3 or 4 of the big MEP firms that design all these sites and things for these companies, and I didn't get the sense that we had any gaps in what we had on site already. And since it's a greenfield site, we're able to put in, everything new. So I don't get the sense that there's an issue there, but you don't really know until there's a tenant. And, so in our sort of fact sheet about the site, we'll talk about our, the power we have and wastewater and those things. And hopefully that's not a deal killer for most folks.
All right. Well, thank you. And kudos again for your work.
Thank you.
Mr. Randolph.
Kyle, I just have one question. From where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're the Lone Ranger here trying to find a way to get a tenant. And when we looked at the previous iteration of this, there was active discussion with Roger Johnson sitting in with us, the role of the county's EDA. And given the fact that you're looking nationally, I would like you to tell us, therefore, have you had conversations with the Albemarle County EDA and with the Commonwealth of Virginia on recruiting or attracting a specific biotech company or companies that fit the profile based on your square footage?
Thanks, Rick. And yeah, I've had multiple conversations with Roger and state and regional EDA authorities about this project. I mean, it's hard for us to market a site that's not approved for what we want to build there. So those conversations were preliminarily and based on a successful rezoning. But I think, I get the sense that there's a lot of resources in Virginia and locally that would find this highly desirable for a variety, from a tax basis, from a job standpoint. And I think from, being mission critical, as Andrew said, to, health and safety of our citizens, that, this is a huge and exciting opportunity for everyone involved. So it's, and I've also talked, in addition to the EDA folks, I've talked to, commercial brokers in Boston and the DC area. And, all this stuff, my hope is all this stuff sort of coalesces and we have sort of a big team and marketing package that we'll share with, sort of all of the trial drug company targets and all of the contract manufacturing organizations. And it does take a whole city. I mean, this is not, at least in my experience, in the commercial side, it's, you hire a commercial broker and you sit there for 6 months or a year, and then they find you a tenant and you're good to go. This is a lot more interactive. I think it's a lot more relationship building. You talk to the pharma companies who are getting into clinical trials, and they haven't done this before, so there's sort of trust level you have to build. There's a lot of moving pieces that we have to work on to be successful. So that's sort of phase 2 of the business plan. Phase 1 is hopefully get the community behind this and supportive of the project.
Thank you, Kyle. And as soon as I pose the question, I see video to the International Space Station, and Roger Johnson has joined us.
Good to see you, Commissioner Randolph. And,
Good to see you, Mr. EDA Chair.
yeah, I just was going to mention that while Kyle is going at this alone financially, for the most part, he's not going at it alone in terms of finding an appropriate tenant. He's had conversations that I'm aware of, not only with us, but with the Central Virginia Partnership for Economic Development, as well as the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. So while he's standing here by himself today, I can assure this particular advisory committee that he's not going at it alone in terms of finding an appropriate tenant that would be befitting of a neighborhood in which you guys live. Thank you.
Thank you for weighing in, Roger. I expected that, but I just wanted Kyle to go ahead and put that on the record for all of us to be aware. But thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, thanks, Commissioner Randolph. And Tom, I think you're up next.
Okay, unmuted. Okay, a couple of random things. One, I think this is an excellent project. I think the location is a really good spot for a project like this. It really is ideal. It's on and off the highway for trucks. They're not plowing through the whole neighborhood with 64. He's going to find, first of all, PhDs are overrated. Once you're manufacturing, the PhDs are gone, and you got a lot of regular folk. They're coming in from Waynesboro. They're coming in from Stanton. They're coming in. We got them coming from Culpeper that far. That's how good these jobs are. They're going to come from the south, but they're going to come in on the bypasses and on 64, and bam, they're back. They're into work. So it's really an excellent location for it. The one quick question, then a piece of, and then a follow up. The timeline, you're just building a shell, or you're not even going to build the shell? You just want all the paperwork approved, right?
I want all the permitting done and ready to go, so the building's shovel ready, which includes the architectural renderings, and we'll have basically all the site work will be done as well. So all the utilities will be stubbed out and ready to go for the site. So just construction timeline.
Okay, your biggest, the one bad part of this location is you're light industrial in an entrance corridor, which means it's going to get towed through the ARB, and you're in that. When the customer's looking at their options, how quickly the turnaround is on something like that is really important. In light industrial, it's so you're going to have to weigh that in. And if you're going to get something pre-approved, I looked at the drawing of your building. One of the things is that you actually do need a lot of exhaust stacks on there. Even I would get it approved with more exhaust stacks than you're going to need, because every one of those hoods, those bio hoods they use, or the chemical hoods, solvent hoods, every laboratory is going to have that 8-inch pipe. Just look at UVA chemistry building. Yes. So you look at UVA chemistry building and the physics building and MR1 and MR this, they got to blow the enormous amounts of air through those labs and throw it out. They don't smell. There's not a lot of quantity in those things, but for just a healthy laboratory environment, that's what's going to be required. And you might as well throw them up there now, because they exist. ARB is going to want to make you shelter those things, cover them up, I don't know, put trees on the top of the building or something, but you're going to need them, and your customer is going to need to have the flexibility to locate those where they need them, because they may not, their labs are going to be on the top floor. They're not going to be on the bottom floor. So those things, you might as well put them up there now. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's a really good point about, we do have a screen on the roof of the building above the roof that we've designed for that. And I think I think that rendering goes to 72 feet or something. So we have another 3 feet in the application that we could go to screen that. And, you're right, the ARB is a pain. But I've been through the ARB, gosh, a dozen times now. So I think with Bruce Wardell, who was an ARB chair designing the building, and the fact that we've already got the other office building approved by the ARB, my hope is that, as soon as we get done with the rezoning process, we'll go to the ARB and get those approvals. And I think you're right, maybe we expand our roof screening system to be more comprehensive, anticipating, more stuff coming out of the roof that we need to screen. That's a very good point.
Hey, Kyle, can I just add something really quickly? Just a point of clarification. We are not, or our tenants, or the future tenant will not be making small molecules in this building. We're not talking about chemical synthesis. We're talking about the production of biologics. So the issue of contamination is about, the fear is that we will contaminate the product, not the other way around. And so most of the exhaust hoods will be just for the purpose of keeping the air moving during cell culture so that a human doesn't infect the cell culture system, as an example. So what's going to be effluent through the roof is going to be ambient air from inside the building. So we're not talking about, again, not chemical synthesis, no, not a chemistry lab. It's a much different process, which is why it's requires such specialization, requires partitioning off the airflow within the building so you can have different products being made without cross-contamination of air, for example.
Right, there's enormous amount of ventilation.
Yes.
And it's overkill, but
Right.
that's the practice today.
Right, but you compared it to the chemistry lab at UVA, and God knows what those undergraduates are putting out in the air when they're in those labs. So it's a lot different than that.
No, but if you have a hood, and even if it's innocuous, you're still going to have an analytical lab in there doing work. They need 100 cubic feet per minute going through those things. Even if it's empty, they're going to pull through those. But I agree, it's not smells, it's not hazardous, but
And I know
it's visual.
Yeah, so I was a chemical engineer at UVA, so I know what goes on in this lab.
You know what they cook up over there.
Yeah, you know, too, MK.
Great. Well, thanks, Tom and Kyle. I would say I work in the public policy building at UVA, and we also blow a lot of hot air, but we don't have quite as much smokestacks. And Dave, the last word is yours.
Well, thank you. I hate following that as a liberal arts major. I only maybe understood one of every 3 words there. I had a couple of questions. We didn't really talk about the structured parking on the back. And what kind of grade. We talked about some managed slopes that go down there, and that's the lower part of the property. But even lower than that part of the property is the apartment complex over on across Wahoo Way, if my geography is correct here. Are you planning extra screening so we're not having those buildings really loom over those people who live there? It's one thing to have a hotel or an office building in that space, but to have this taller building plus a parking structure sort of looming over them. Maybe in terms of the design of the parking structure, we wouldn't be looking at something like Market Street Garage, which I think does a really nice job of blending in with its surroundings. But to have that sort of looming over those folks, and also the folks in the back over at Region 10, I think maybe some additional screening or some ways to mitigate the impact of these really big structures, which are on the low part of your property, but are still higher than the adjacent properties, might be worth looking at. And also just sort of what kinds of traffic backups, internal and external, would come to this. I'm going to assume that these aren't 24-hour facilities. You're not running them, 3 shifts to make these things. This is more of a 9 to 5 operation.
It probably varies from the tenant. I don't know particularly what the tenant would want, but I would assume that most production is not 24/7.
Again, right, because
there'd be a small team on site 24/7, but not the full team.
Right.
And on
Yeah,
the
I guess just, I'm sorry. I gave you 2 there to start. I apologize.
So the screening, we do have a pretty good setback from our neighbors, and that if you see the grade of that section of the site right now, that parking garage and the base of that building actually sits pretty low. And the parking deck sort of fits in a little valley back there. So at height, and maybe this rendering's not the best one, it's almost, this is a 3-level, or I think 3-level that we rendered. It sits 2 stories below the building here, and Region 10 actually, the dirt grade of Region 10 actually sits above that building. And also, I think the grade for Wahoo Way is also pretty high. So this is actually relatively low compared to our neighbors based on existing topography.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't having something that was going to loom over them in this space. And I don't know if structured parking adds to, and this tied into my question about how the plant operated or the facility operated, in terms of structured parking leading to more idling vehicles trying to get out, and just sort of adding to a little bit of ambient pollution at the time. And I don't know how that piece would work, right? If everybody's getting off work at 5 o'clock and spilling out of a parking structure, depending on what it looks like getting onto Old Lynchburg or Wahoo Way, depending on which way they want to turn, especially, if they're waiting at the circle that we all anticipate is coming. So I do have some concerns about the addition. What's the net increase in parking spaces by adding the structure?
Kelsey, do you remember we did that analysis? I don't remember.
Yeah, certainly. So the parking structure is proposed at 3 stories. It's about 60 spaces per story. And just to kind of, I guess, put that, so for a total, of 180 spaces within the structured parking. And as far as just kind of putting that into comparison to the other garages that we have here, I think Market Street has somewhere in the realm of 400 spaces, and Water Street garage has over 1,000. So just as far as, idling and everything, I probably many of us may have experienced the Water Street 5 o'clock exit, but it's a little bit of a different volume for that compared to what's proposed here.
Right. I didn't notice the dog park as shown in the rendering with the new building. I'm assuming that's part of the economic development agreement and it has to stay back there, right? I just didn't see the fencing back there. That's a much smaller space than in the first thing. So I don't know if I don't remember if there was a size requirement in the economic development agreement on the dog park, but I know that outgoing Supervisor Palmer was a big proponent of having that there. So I know we want to make sure that stays. My biggest worry is that as we move to light industrial, and I hear about sort of these things that I've heard, and I'm trying to think about where I'd heard these before, a light industrial parcel with good access to water and electricity right by 64. And it came to me that it was the Deschutes Brewery, that there was a rezoning, right, for that property. And, and this may have been what MK was sort of getting at of, if this falls through, and MK, please tell me if I'm overstating it here. But if the biotech falls through and we're zoned for light industrial, is Champion Brewery, which seems to be on a great path as a Charlottesville business, and says, hey, I would love this facility because it does put me right by 64 and it will work with the facility I've now got on 29. And so, I don't think, those are the types of things that we worry about. And then the last piece is that even though you've got that office building approved, that all of a sudden, if we're not going back to offices and that Class A need isn't there, that are we going to be back here 6 months to a year from now asking for it basically to be an entire light industrial project? And then all of a sudden, instead of having office space and a hotel, which the area needs, and housing, well, now we've got this sort of light industrial dropped into the, part of a residential area. And that's, I think a worry that we've got here in terms of this is not a use that's really consistent with the master plan, although it's a great use. And I hear from both David and Tom's points. And I think we need great jobs. I just wish, Tom, they weren't all coming from Stanton and Culpeper and Point South. I was hoping that they were living in and around Charlottesville, that these were jobs that could lead to home ownership in the Charlottesville Albemarle community. So I don't really know where I'm going with the question with that. I apologize for that. But that would be the type of use that you could proffer out, right? I guess is what I'm saying when we talk about this being light industrial, that we don't necessarily want a brewery in a residential area.
Right,
Thank
but
you, David, as always, for the points that will keep us all up at night, right before we wrap up the meeting. Sorry, Kyle, do you want
I'm
to
sorry.
yeah, I mean, we're not like a scale production brewery is not going to work on this site anyway, because the truck is just really not set up for that. But I wouldn't want to limit that. If really don't like breweries, that's fine. But I will say I've talked to several brew pubs about the retail portions of the site already. And, I thought people were pretty excited about being able to go walk and drink a beer close to where they live, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, and I'm certainly not talking about a brew pub scale. I'm not talking about Champion downtown. I'm talking about what Champion and Reason are doing out 29. I think we're talking about differences of scale with that. We're not talking nano breweries or even microbreweries, but something of a more commercial nature that doesn't have the restaurant component. And that's where I'm getting at. And please, I would love to be able to. Well, I can walk to my house from my house over to Fifth Street Station and to dine and to do those sorts of things. And I appreciate that. And I think people in that area would love to be able to do the same. I think we're talking about the differences of scale here, as opposed to a commercial, we're bottling beer and we're brewing it here and we're bringing in the trucks all around the clock to get it shipped out, that type of thing, as opposed to what you're talking about. I think a brew pub would be fine. It's a scale thing.
Well, thank you, David and Kyle and Kelsey, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. And what you presented looks promising, and appreciate your patient fielding of our questions.
Thank you very much.
Sure
Appreciate
thing. And James, I know we're over time and I don't want to hold up anything, but we did send out community meeting notifications saying that, neighbors would have an opportunity to ask questions. I just want to ensure that there's no attendees on the call that had any questions for us before we log off.
I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay, cool.
James, can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
In the notice that came to us, hold on, I'm going to pull it up. We all get the memorandum about the application, and you should be able to find there a link to the online submittal for this. And I did find in that information a detailed chart about the uses that were permitted per block in the code of development. And I found it very helpful personally to look at that. So I just wanted to point it out for other people who might have questions about the uses that are permitted per block, because most of the type of industrial uses are just not permitted, like machinery and equipment sales and service. It is very clear in there. So that's helpful if anybody wants to look at that.
Thank you, MK, for pointing that out. Good to have a realtor on the board. Rick, you are the only liaison present tonight. I would love it if you could update us on the goings on in the county writ large. You're on mute right now, though. Rick, you need to unmute if you want us to hear you.
I'll start at the state level and then work down to the local and include the regional. First off, the latest headline in Annapolis. No, James, I'll go ahead and obviate that. We looked at two applications and the Planning Commission on Tuesday, one of which was 1805 Avon Street Extended. Number of you had weighed in at the CAC meeting on that application. And the Planning Commission went ahead and approved it. simply because some of the issues that are there are issues, quite frankly, that I think the board needs to address. We could belabor it on the planning commission level, but the density seems to be fairly intense. And essentially what we've seen, Andy did an excellent job, by the way, of presenting it to the planning commission. This is the second application in this immediate area owned by the same individual. And it's produced a very high level of density. However, it's very difficult to incorporate a conclusion because there is not enough density to justify a TIA, transportation impact analysis or traffic impact analysis, to be able to say that this project is going to produce X number of additional cars. So we don't know that because there are not enough units to justify a TIA. There were no proffers involved for already an exceptionally overcrowded Mountain View Elementary School. And there was no provision for a CAT bus stop along Avon Street Extended. Even though CAT is not going out there currently, since CAT is now a free transit service for the next 4 years, perhaps they will consider extending their buses. And that's something that I hope the board prevails on the city to do that, because it's something that's long been wanted, going out the Avon Street corridor, out to Arden Place at the end there on the right. So it was approved. The second thing we looked at was an application for a environmental studies camp out in the Samuel Miller district. And the planning commission voted 4-1 to go ahead and reject that application. I was the one actually in favor of it, because I think there is a solution potentially available by setting up a one-way street from the exit out of the entrance exit of the camp, because that section of the road has 3 pinch points that contribute to a very dangerous two-way road. So anyhow, those were the 2 applications. There's a lot going on at the board level. As you know, the final report came out from the CIP advisory committee that Karen Firehawk sits on as the planning commission representative. And there was an article in today's Daily Progress. What would we be doing without Allison Warble to be telling us what's going on in the county? I just cannot imagine where the public in this community would be without the outstanding local reporting that we have to inform people what's going on.
Who I believe is listening in as a attendee right now.
Oh, she is. Okay. Okay. And that was a non-paid political endorsement on my part, and actually payback for the number of years that Allison has been here. I think she's been here now 6 years, or very close to it, but who's counting? And it leads into my being able to say, this is my last Albemarle County meeting. I leave proudly after having completed 10 years of service in Albemarle County, 6 years as a planning commissioner and 4 as a supervisor. You all have been great to work with. You can see this evening the level of expertise, insight, and planning understanding that all of you bring to this process is absolutely awesome. And I could not be more pleased with all of you, and having had the opportunity to work with you both as a supervisor and as a commissioner. So I want to thank you all for that opportunity to serve with you in the best interests of Albemarle County. And with that, I don't think I have anything else to say.
Rick, we can't wait to hear what's next for you because I know it's something. I know you're not going to be sitting still. And I can let you know, I absolutely expect to see you in the Scottsville 4th of July parade because it won't be the same without you. My kids have received candy from you there for as long as they've been alive. So I know we'll be seeing more of you.
I appreciated you always telling me where the kids were so that I could be sure that I offloaded at least a tractor trailer load of candy with it.
Rick, on behalf of the entire commission, thank you so much for your years of service. You've been around as long as I have or longer, and always been a voice of wisdom and helped me along. So cheers to Rick.
Very much, all of you. Thanks, Roger. You have good connection from the space station.
My last order of business that I wanted to handle is I think we've got a new member who's been on mute and camera off the entire time. But Caitlin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the community? You're still on mute. It's something I have to say every meeting.
Oh, there we go. Hey guys. Yeah, I'm Caitlin Riopel. I've been with Habitat for Humanity for the last 10 years, and I'm working closely with the Southwood team. And so I'm joining this in hopes of staying apprised of what's happening in the neighborhood, and look forward to working with you all. I'm a longtime Charlottesville Albemarle resident, so I went through Brownsville, Henley, Western, and went away for school, but came back about a decade ago. So I live in Ivy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Caitlin.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Our last agenda item, is there any business that folks want to go ahead and get on the minutes to discuss in next meetings? And I'll start with, I was supposed to be chair for a year and I'm ending up year 2 in January. So we will have an election next month and I won't be the chair at the end of that election. So if you're interested in being chair, or I'm speaking for MK, I assume vice chair, and I know I'm speaking for Craig in taking minutes, please consider taking on one of those roles and letting me know, and we'll make sure that we nominate you. Other than that, what other agenda items are folks interested in hearing about for January? I'm going to interpret silence as you'll email me with things that you're interested in hearing about for January's meeting. And with that, I recommend we conclude tonight's meeting. Can I get a second, please? Thank you. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, January 20th. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting will be posted at a later date in accordance with Emergency Ordinance 20 Tech Alpha 16 and open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. I adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in January.